We just said, look, you don't get to talk to anybody you know for the first 3 minutes after the service. If I'm a guest, if you're not talking to me in 3 minutes, I'm in the parking lot.
Well, hey everyone, welcome to the Intentional Churches podcast. We are here to help give you practical wisdom and insight into leading your church and helping you radically align your teams and your people back to the Great Commission. But do you ever feel uncertain about how to move your church forward together? Well, the ChurchOS assessment helps you gauge where your church is today so you can know where it needs to go for tomorrow. And you'll walk away from this assessment with valuable insight and clear next steps based on your results. So make sure you visit intentionalchurches.com/podcast to get started. Well, we've got an awesome conversation today. And as usual, I'm joined by my good friend, Doug Parks. What is up, Doug?
Oh, all things in life are up and to the right, Erin. It's awesome right now.
Oh, wow. I love that. I love that, Doug. Good for you. Up and to the right. We also have Tom with us. Tom Kopp is with us today. What's up, Tom?
Hey, things are to the upper and righter. I'm just going to try to be one up on Doug.
Perfect. I love it. I love it. Tom, thanks for joining us today. Would you just maybe introduce yourself? Tell us a little bit about you, your ministry story, anything personally you'd love for us to know. Tell us about yourself.
Yeah, so I grew up in the church, and I didn't go through those rebellious years. I just have loved God, and that just always clicked with me. So I knew before I started high school I wanted to go into ministry. So I've been in the ministry for over 40 years and have just loved every bit of it, even a couple of the brutal seasons. And anybody I know that's been in ministry for years has had a couple of those. But I absolutely love God Church, and so I want to do everything I can to invest my life in her. I've had the privilege of being everything from a youth pastor to a life group to an associate pastor to an executive pastor to a lead pastor. And I've just tried to be where God wants me to be rather than determine where I want to be.
Mm-hmm. Wow, that's awesome. You have a family? Tell us about your family, Tom.
So I have an amazing wife who is an educator and a school counselor, and she just is she is for the kid that is struggling in school. And she just gets her mind wrapped around the fact that when you understand what's going on at home, there's a reason they don't care about history and math. And so she's trying to come alongside of those individuals and say, hey, how can we help them get life a little more balanced and settled out so that they can then focus on school? I have two boys, one that is 29. He works for Apple Computers, and so he is of absolutely no help to me because he can't help me according to company policy, but he knows everything I need to know. And then my youngest son is 28. He worked for Hope International University in Fulton, California, about 15 minutes from Disneyland. He oversees all the residents on the campus.
Okay, right on. That's awesome. So you are at a church. What church are you at?
I am at Kimball Christian Church in the booming 800 population metropolitan area of Kimball, Minnesota.
Kimball, Minnesota. I'm going to be so honest with you, Tom. I was today years old when I first heard about Kimball, Minnesota. I've never heard of this booming metropolitan area. So,
yeah, well, you want to visit sometime because if you come in from one direction, the city population sign will tell you it's 799. But if you come in from the other direction, it's 801.
Wow. Contradictory data. Oh, that's awesome. Why don't you give us a little bit of context for where you live in Minnesota, for the church itself? Just give us some context.
Yeah, so I'm in, like I just shared, I'm in a small farming community, 800 people. And my connection to this is where my wife's family settled after her dad retired from 21 years in the Air Force. And in Minnesota, what I find in our churches, Restoration Movement or independent Christian churches, they're extremely small. So in a town of 800, we are the third largest Restoration church in the state of Minnesota. And that to me is not a bragging point. That to me is a frustration beyond all belief. We got some significant metropolitan areas that are just really struggling. And so the thing I see in the context among our churches is there's a real scarcity mindset. In a small church, it's about how do I not lose someone? How do I not make someone mad? How do I not, cost us a resource? And so the idea of having vision is just pushing uphill and pushing uphill hard. I'm from a different background where I've been really blessed in some churches that have abundance. And so they dream, they imagine, they look at all that God could do. They look at all the unlimited resources that God has. And so they're willing to swing for the fence. They're willing to take a risk. And if it doesn't work, it's like, okay, we tried. We learned something. That's radically different when everybody is thinking about, we're just trying to stay open. We're trying to stay alive for another, month.
Yeah. Tom, I had the privilege and due to you to be with about 20 churches in Minnesota earlier this year, church teams. And I learned about a little bit, although everybody didn't want to talk about it very much, this thing called Minnesota Nice. Can you explain for our listeners and maybe me in a little more detail, what does that mean exactly? There's actually a store in the airport called Minnesota Nice.
Yeah, it's a real thing. So I'm from California and Arizona, and so my wife would say things that are Minnesota phrases, and I thought she was just making these things up. And one of them is Minnesota Nice. And I moved here, and in less than a week, 2 or 3 people said Minnesota Nice, and she had to stay and work in Arizona for a year before she could come out. And so I'm calling her, and I'm like, it's a real thing. It's a real thing. And what it really comes down to is people just don't believe in being honest fully with someone if it might hurt them. So rather than like in intentional church, one of the things you guys would say is give the last 10%. In Minnesota Nice, you don't give the last 30%. And it's that thing of don't say it because it could hurt somebody or offend somebody, rather than give them the gift of giving them the full 100%. So it's a radically different shift on what it looked like to share with people.
That's interesting. That's really interesting.
Erin, can you imagine trying to lead in that environment?
No.
Nobody, you were. Woo.
So
very opposite.
Here's the funny contrast. My wife and I spent a couple years in Australia, and in Australia, they're just blunt. And when we were first there's a couple times we're like, what are they going to do? Based on what that person just said. And it's not offensive to them at all. It's just, they're just direct and honest and say it. They don't even think of it offending someone.
Wow. Interesting. Tom, maybe give us some history of your church. I know you said you're the 3rd largest in the state, which is crazy considering you're in a farming town of 800 people. But maybe just give us some history, some context for the church itself.
Yeah. So the church has been here over 150 years, and it's a healthy church in that sense, in that it's not been one that's full of division and divisiveness. It's just that the church has been steady. It is the church that have been blessed with some good dynamic leaders who are willing to have vision, even for a small community. So in fact, like just before I got here, the church was running about 220 people, but they just finished building debt-free a gymnasium. And it's because they just have a vision for reaching children and students. And so the church in that sense has always been healthy and stable. At the same time, it has always seen itself as, how do we help more than just ourselves? So we hold a statewide ski retreat that have been going on for over 45 years. When my wife was in high school, she was at the first one. And here we are, approaching retirement years, and it's still going on. So the church had that kind of a background. I would say when I came, the thing that was unique is the lead pastor before me had retired, and they were still looking for someone. I won't get into that story unless you ask, but they were still looking for somebody. So when I came, there was kind of a sense of everything's healthy. They were back to the numbers they were before COVID, whereas many churches are still trying to get back there. They were already back to those numbers. And then since then, we've grown by just short of, or right around 50% in about 3.5 years. Wow. So we're working on it. We know we're supposed to have double kingdom impact in 5 years.
That's amazing. Yes, I love that. So when you arrived, what are some of the things you identified early on as areas to kind of focus on to either bring about change or to push vision forward? I've heard you use that phrase, having vision even for a small community. What were some of those areas of focus?
So for me, I was going to be a youth ministry pastor for life. And about 17 years in, I have a disease in my eyes, and so I don't have any peripheral vision. And I was the biggest threat in our youth ministry to other kids. I was just running them over, knocking them down. So I kind of stepped into some other roles, but I never really wanted to be a lead pastor until I was in a situation where God just kind of put me into that role. And while I don't have to be the guy that makes decisions, I really, really value culture. And when you put the right culture in a place, it will frame everything else for you. So for me, when I came in, the first thing I went after was culture. So for in our situation, a couple of those things were, number one, I just brought about, we're going to have a lot of fun and joy and laughter. Part of it is I'm wired that way, but I just also believe that we're just supposed to be full of joy. We're supposed to be laughing. It ought to be fun, type of thing, rather than somber and quiet is more spiritual. I'm not wired that way. Mm-hmm. Another thing for me in terms of culture is that there has to be a passion for reaching the lost. Now, I didn't always have that. Like I said, I grew up in the church, and so I just didn't have to think about hell because I wasn't going to go there. I grew up in the church. I loved God. I gave my life to him early, so I didn't think about hell until I got to college, and I had to write a 5-page paper on hell. And I had to really look at what Scripture said, and I had to think about how incredibly painful it would be and how long it would last. That paper wrecked me. That's over 45 years ago, and that's still the only paper I remember from my undergraduate studies. And so from that standpoint, I'll do anything short of sinning to try to reach a lost person. That wasn't part of our culture. And so when I first started talking about that, there was a little bit of a pushback in terms of, hey, what about us? We're here. We're the Christians. We're the ones that pay your salary. They wouldn't say that, but you just feel that. And I just had to keep talking about the one, and I had to help them learn to celebrate that. So, for instance, one of the things we would do is because we live in a very outdoor area, and we're in the land of 10,000 lakes, people love to do their baptisms in a lake. And so that's awesome. There's something natural about that. But that also means nobody sees them, unless they're part of the family that got invited to go do it. So we just started right away saying every single one of those is going to be videotaped. And then the next week, we're going to show that. And when we show that, our people just go ape crazy, clapping and cheering and hooting and hollering. And so the first time somebody's in our church and they see a video of a baptism or one live, they just kind of are taken back. But what they get the understanding of real quick is, man, that's a big deal, and they celebrate it here. Well, that's a part of culture. And so that's a part of making it to where people want to see new people come to faith, and they see that as something worthy of celebrating. Because the unfortunate truth is every new person that comes is creating a cost for the 99. Okay, so all of a sudden now we have to have a third service. I don't want 3 services. We've never had 3 services before. And I don't know everybody anymore. I used to know everybody. Well, now I don't see everybody. And one of the things that I saw in that is that was a hidden perception. The third service is not why we don't know everybody anymore. It just feels like it is because we don't want to say we don't know everybody anymore because new people are coming. That would just sound really bad to say, hey, we got too many new people coming. Stop that. But it doesn't sound bad to say, hey, I don't like 3 services because now we don't see everybody anymore. So I'll give one example of that. We used to have an 8 o'clock service, and then at 9:15, we had Sunday school for all hours, all ages. And then we had a 10:30 service. And so I recently had a conversation with somebody who goes to our third service. They've never gone to Sunday school, but they said, I don't like the 3 service thing because I didn't even know so-and-so was still coming because they go to that first service. And you got to look at them and go, you didn't know that before because they weren't staying for Sunday school. You weren't coming for Sunday school, so they were gone before you got here. Well, yeah, but still, I don't like 3 services. So those are some of the things culturally that you have to kind of push towards and help people understand that they're bigger value than the fact that it made me uncomfortable.
Yeah, that's good. Doug, do you have somewhere you want to jump off that?
Well, Tom, it's just great for any of our listeners who are in a church or situation where you're you're trying to change culture, and especially from being more insider focused to out there reaching people. I mean, what Tom's talking about is very, this is heavy lifting and takes a consistent backbone, right, Tom? Like it's heavy lifting. So I'm just wondering, maybe were there other examples of things you did? I'm hearing like the storytelling through video and of the baptisms and your responses to people. Are there other things that you did practically as you're trying to indoctrinate this culture of the Great Commission and evangelism and all this?
Yeah, so a couple of things. We took our staff through intentional churches. We took our elders through intentional churches. We took our board through intentional churches. And we use the study guides that are available as a way to just kind of talk through things and process them. But it is woven into messages left and right.
Wow.
One of the things when I first became a lead pastor that I had to get my head wrapped around is casting vision doesn't mean you have a 45-minute talk where you say everything about your vision. Casting vision is one of those things that has to be dripped into every single message. And so sometimes it's about one of your values. Sometimes it's about part of your mission. Sometimes it's about your vision statement. Sometimes it's about talking about the catalytic weekend experience. Sometimes it's about talking about the Great Commission engine. But it's constantly doing that so that those things are constantly being fed and nurtured and grown, rather than trying to say at one time, recognizing that people are going to forget that in less than a week. And so by doing little bits of it all the time, you just keep it aware of people, but you keep it aware of people in a way that it doesn't feel like you just dumped a truckload on them. You just sprinkled it into everything you're saying. In some way, shape, or form, vision has to be talked about every single weekend.
No, that's just great reminders for leading, especially when you're trying to lead change. Tom, did anything surprise you, good or bad? Did anything surprise you as you were going down this road of trying to change the culture or add this piece to the culture?
Yeah, so I'm smiling because I'm almost embarrassed to say it. And that is, I've been in ministry for over 40 years, and I forget how much the church naturally drifts inward and how resistant people are to change. So let me talk a little bit about drifting inward. So for instance, my father-in-law years ago, I heard this just this weekend, my father years ago asked 8 people to come up to the front and to make a circle. And those 8 people came up to the front, they make a circle facing inward and hold hands immediately. And so he said, why are you all facing inward? And it's just an illustration of the fact our natural bent is to look in. Same thing when it comes to the church. My natural bent, if I go to a church, is to look at it and go, do I like the music? Do I like the staff? Do I connect with that pastor? Not, do I agree with the vision of this church? Is this church a church I could bring a friend to? Is this church a church that my family would come to? Is this church, is the music my music? Or is the music that my children and eventually my grandchildren want to come to? So there's this natural bent to kind of focus inward. And so I just think we got to constantly push against that. What helps is when all of a sudden somebody else brings their one, all of a sudden they start to see some of these things and they're like, okay, yeah, I'm grateful we didn't sing that song about Ebenezer. Not sure who Ebenezer is or what his stone was doing, but they loved that song until the one time their friend came and they're like, what's up with that? Or why do we keep talking about these angels and their prostrates? And it's like, wait a minute, you bring a guest and all of a sudden they see that, so you got to push against some of those things.
Yeah, that's good. Tom, I appreciate you mentioning the Intentional Church's book and that, you and the team starting there, just kind of getting your head around it. But you have been kind of a person of peace in Minnesota to get other churches on board with kind of doing this. So currently you're in what we call a ChurchOS One Team cohort, installing with 3 other churches in Minnesota. Tell us a little bit about those churches, if you would, and then let's talk about what's going on there.
Yeah, so there are 3 other churches involved. One of them is a church of about 400. So they would be the second largest in our movement. And they're in a unique situation where they have a lead pastor who's been there nearly 30 years, who will retire at the end of June. and they have their succession pastor already in place. And so in talking to them, one of the things I challenge them with is, guys, if you don't do something to put your church's focus on its mission and vision, the focus will be 100% about who the lead pastor was and who the lead pastor is going to be. And neither one of them wanted it to be about them. Great guys. They didn't want the focus to be 100% on this transition. So they said, okay, we get what you're saying. They jumped into one team. Another one is a smaller church of about 60. It's got a young guy in there whose father planted the church about, I want to say maybe 5 years ago now. And then the father had a tragedy and passed away suddenly. And so this kid was in college at the time, and he stepped away from college early and stepped in and became the pastor of that church. And to his credit, he's doing a great job, and yet the entire time he just feels way in over his head. And I would say that for his age, he's 5 to 10 years above his peers. The challenge is he just is currently still handicapped by his lack of experience. No fault of his, but it's just one of the things he struggled against. So again, intentional churches has helped him think years beyond what his experience is helping him to think. It also put him in a cohort where there's 3 other churches that he's bouncing ideas off of and are just kind of encouraging him and supporting him. It also allows him to be, and his leadership, to be in a cohort where they're hearing other ideas and go, okay, we need to figure out how would that look in our setting. The third church is the church that is in one of the outer rings of the Twin Cities Metroplex. And it is a church that has, from my perspective, unlimited potential. It has to shift its thinking a little bit. It sees all the other churches around itself and sees it as a limited field. And so it's that thing of just going, look, there is so much there to eat. Every single one of those churches could triple in size, and your church could still grow by 10 times. And so ChurchOS is helping him begin to see that and helping their leaders to focus on what they can do rather than seeing what all these other churches are doing that are far beyond them in their current development.
What kinds of fruit are you beginning to see, either in your own church or in these other churches? You alluded to it, but maybe dig in a little bit more. Just what sort of fruit are you beginning to see emerge because of this kind of way of thinking around intentional churches, even some of the collaboration happening in this cohort? Talk about that.
Okay. So I'll start with our church because I know it's the best. So we, before I got here, the 2 years before I got here, 1 year there were 2 baptisms, the next year there were 6. In the first year when we started looking at ChurchOS, we had 35 baptisms.
Wow.
And the following year we had 19 baptisms. I don't even know what we're at so far this year, but we'll be on that same trend. But then the other thing we did is we followed up with that and we said, okay, so of those baptisms, of everybody 18 years of age or older, how many of them are connected either to some type of a small group or serving on some kind of a team? And other than a group of 4 people that just got baptized in the last 6 weeks, all of them but 2. So the nice thing is we're not just seeing that reaching of the one, but we're immediately doing everything we can to engage them in the discipleship process. So for a couple of the other churches, one of them set up a team just to kind of walk through their building and just kind of say, hey, have a one awareness filter and just look at everything. And they came back just almost appalled at things they saw that have been there for years that they never saw before. And so one of them saw something in the area where they do weddings, and it's like, I would never want to be married in that space with that for my wedding backdrop.
Yes.
And it wasn't seen as that. It wasn't looked at through that lens. Other ones were walking around and going, man, if I was a guest in the place, I'd have no idea where the restrooms are or anything else. And so, again, just taking that one awareness filter has caused them to see things, to become aware of things. Every one of the churches in the cohort had done some work on their engagement pathway, and they all are experiencing different levels of success. I would say for us, we've done something for 3 or 4 months, and it's working, and then all of a sudden we just find that's not working. It's like, okay, we got to shift again. And so I would love to say that that's one of those things that we get to solve once, and it's just set for the rest of our life of our church. But it's not. It's that thing of constantly looking at the data and just going, okay, what steps are working and where are the gaps? Where are the things falling apart? For a couple of the other churches, it has caused them to say, okay, we've got to rethink and create what is our vision? What is our mission? What is our value? Because if we're supposed to be guiding toward those things or leading toward those things, we got to know what those things are. You know, I can't tell you what highway to hop on if I don't know what city at least that we're headed to, you know, just pick any one of them and just take it, you know, kind of a thing. And so it has caused them to be aware that they're not being as intentional as they can be because they haven't defined some of the things that they're trying to actually do.
That's so good, Tom. And, you know, for our listeners, it's refreshing to hear churches that you're talking about of 60 and a couple hundred or 400 who are, you know, fighting with conviction to kind of get back to these scriptural basics, the basic blocking and tackling of Great Commission accomplishment, and they're getting results, which they're moving the ball. And so I want to transition kind of this question that you maybe be a little bit of an advisor for our listeners, and if you were thinking about just really a few practical things, if some of our listeners are in a church where they're having to think about kind of new culture, revitalization a little bit, focusing back on reaching people far from God, you know, what would be a couple things that you would recommend that they start with or think through first that might help them get on this road?
Yeah, what I would think, the first thing I think I would do is figure out who are the key people that you need to communicate the vision to and help them to understand it before you start trying to implement it. So again, if you just walk into the church and you have a clear vision of where you're trying to go and you just start trying to lean into that way, it's only fair that you're going to get pushback because nobody else knows where you're trying to go. Nobody else has been brought on board with that vision. So I think one of the key things is before you start implementing a lot of change, help your people, your key leaders, your influencers, even if they're not in a positional of authority, if they're influencers, help them to see where you're trying to go so that they can help bring other people along with you. And then what I would say is you've got to just decide where you're going to start. I think sometimes it's like we walk into the garage and the garage is just a total wreck. And we need to go in and organize it. We need to throw half of it away. And we look at it and we just go, man, I don't even know where to start. Okay, I'm going to go in the house and watch a football game and maybe next week I'll do it. At some point, you got to just say, okay, we're going to start somewhere. And you just start going to work on things. So one of the things we did is we looked at what are a couple of things that we have as a strength. So in a town of 800 people, we have 117 3-year-old through 5th graders every Wednesday. And then on top of that, we have another 50 to 60 junior and high school kids. So we said, okay, there's our strength, okay? And it's not my good looks, it's our children. And so we just said, all right, let's build on that. So we started saying, what can we do to help those families begin to come and connect for certain things? So our student ministry did a parent night. And so we have this gym, and so they did a bunch of competitions where the students are on one side, their parents on the other side, and they're beating each other up with dodgeballs and stuff like that, and they're laughing and just having a great time. And then when we send the students over to their small group, all the adults were pulled into another room, and we did a small group with them. And so it's just like let them see and experience what their kids are experiencing, because probably half of those families don't go to our church. They just know if you want to invest in your kids, we're the church that is doing that. And so we just thought, how do we help them go from they don't go to church at all to they let their kids come, to they would come for a one-off event, kind of a thing in support of their kids. And then eventually those people started creeping into the church. The other thing we have done is we've tried to be real intentional about how do we follow up and connect with people on a personal level. So for instance, I was from a large mega church, multi-site, and there's a lot of systems that you have to put in place when you're a larger church. I'm not saying they're bad. I'm just saying there's a lot of systems you have to put in place. In our church, if somebody walks in, there's somebody else that knows them. This is a small community. There's somebody that they went to school with, somebody they live by, somebody they work with. And so one of the things we did immediately was we just told our people, look, from now on, 3-minute rule. And everybody looks at me like, what in the world is a 3-minute rule? And we just said, look, you don't get to talk to anybody you know for the first 3 minutes after the service. Because here's the deal. If I'm a guest, if you're not talking to me in 3 minutes, I'm in the parking lot. You know what? Your friends are going to be here. They're going to be here longer than you want them to be here. Talk to the guests first. And what was funny was the first weekend I said that, and the next weekend I said, I had people come up to me afterward and go, I tried to talk to the guests, but there was too long of a line. I couldn't even get to them, you know? But I'll tell you what, every single one of those guests came back. They weren't offended when they heard the 3-minute rule, and they weren't offended that people were trying to talk to them. But one of the things that was a simple step that every single person in our church could participate in. Okay, I love talking to our people about easy ways to talk about your faith. I'm far more of one that says, talk to people about what Jesus means to you, then teach them theologically how your sin separated you from God and you needed a sacrifice that would be a propitiation to redeem you and reconcile you to God. It's like, no, just talk to them about how your personal relationship with God gives you hope when you feel overwhelmed. Talk to them about the fact that it just caused you to look at your wife differently, and so you talk to her differently. It caused you to think more clearly about how you spend time with your kids. Those are the things that non-Christians are asking about. So, for instance, one of the things I would say is same thing when it comes to preaching. Preach for transformation, not information. You know, we live in a culture that has free access to unlimited information 24/7. People are not coming to the church for biblical information. What they're coming to the church for is for hope, for connection, for life change. So as you teach God's word, but I cannot think of a message that Jesus gave that was just about explaining the book of Isaiah for the sake of explaining the book of Isaiah. Every single message that we read in the Gospels from Jesus is about a way of life. It's about how we treat somebody. It's about learning a different lifestyle. It's about shaping our heart. So when we preach, we've got to preach that way rather than preach informationally.
So good, Tom.
I have one more question for you. We're starting to run out of time, but Tom, for a season, you were at a large church in the Phoenix area. And so you have been, as you shared earlier, you've been in many different ministry contexts. You've carried many different ministry hats and roles and all the things. What would you say, you know, we have listeners of churches of all sizes, but you've had to make a different sort of effort around vision, around culture at your small church than you did at your big church. They're just different contexts. What would you say that listeners from larger churches should be learning from your efforts in a small church? Like what those of us who are in big churches, what could we learn about the ways that you've had to approach small church ministry, vision, culture, those things? Yeah.
So I would say one of the things that large churches are great at is they're great at creating events to be able to bring people to. They're great at creating a weekend experience that you can bring people to, and it is nothing but first-class quality all the way. Where the large church struggles, I think, is I'll share two things. One, they have to help people see that they have to be involved in reaching their one beyond just an invitation. Invitations are great. I love invitations. It's the lowest form of evangelism out there. All I have to do is tell you, hey, come Sunday at 10. Everybody can do that. But they also have to learn how to just have a conversation. And when somebody talking about a struggle, to just be able to say, you know what, man, my wife and I, we fought for 3 years about that. The thing that finally helped us was when we read in 1 Corinthians chapter 13 that love always trusts. So I had to trust if something could be said more than one way that my wife meant it the good way rather than get defensive. So we just have to, I think in larger churches, teach people how to be a part of that evangelism process other than just invite. I think we also have to, in that same vein, every single person on staff needs to be able to name some ones. And the hard thing is, you know, we work with our staffs and hopefully they're all 99s or close to that. But we got to figure out, what am I intentionally going to do to build some relationships with ones? And then the other thing I would say that a big shift for large churches, and when I was at Central, one of the things we did with our entire staff was we started going through the ministry buffet. And so we just started looking at, the amount of resources, whether it was dollars or effort or promotion or people, and about the results of that, the impact of that. And one of the things we discovered is we were putting a whole bunch of resources towards some things that we could, very, very little could we identify impact. There were some other things that we looked at and just said, you know what, it would not change the impact of that if we did this differently. There were a couple of things that certain teams loved so much, but they were in the wrong box. And so when we were having that conversation, I said, okay, so here's the deal. You got 6 months. What do you have to do to move that box? And if you can do something to move that, to make it more productive for less resource, you can keep it. If not, you're going to have to eliminate that. And so again, it's hard for churches sometimes, the larger churches, to realize our entire menu is creating competition for the things we really want to get people to. They're so busy at the bread and salad that they're not getting to the meat part. And so they're more frustrated that nobody taking that leadership development course, nobody taking the course on how to disciple your neighbor, because they're doing the bike ride club and those other things. Now, I get it. Those things can be a great avenue for the one, but the problem is we got to help the 99 recognize what's for a one and what's for a 99.
I think that's such a good word. Like we did an audit similarly at one point to say, if our core people came to all the things that we offer during the week, how many nights a week would they be at the church? Not even with their neighbors or their coworkers or their roommates or the people close to them but far from God, because they're here 5 nights a week. So, Tom, I just think that's really helpful. And I think just the encouragement for all of us that, like, those of us in bigger churches have a lot to learn from the efforts of small churches and vice versa. And so I just appreciate your perspective, just wide, diverse perspective, Tom. Thanks for that. Doug, any other observations you want to make before we wrap?
I think I would just say, Tom, on behalf of the IC team and our listeners, thank you for your faithfulness in ministry, your willingness to say yes to God. And it just astounds me, the view that we get to see churches like Kimball Christian Church, that I'm going to guess most of our listeners have never heard of Kimball, Minnesota. And yet you're there in a vibrant church that's reaching people far from God. And just thank you for that. Thank you very much.
Yeah, it's really cool. Tom, thanks for jumping into the conversation today. There's a lot to learn from what you've shared. And to our listeners, I hope that you'll just take time to absorb a lot of what Tom has said and his experience. Thanks again for listening to the Intentional Churches podcast. If this podcast has been helpful to you, please leave us a rating and review wherever you listen to your podcasts. This just helps us tremendously as we grow and try to reach new leaders. And remember, you can take the ChurchOS assessment to gauge where your church is at today to know where it needs to go for tomorrow. And make sure you visit intentionalchurches.com/podcast to get started with that. And we'll see you next time.